Toronto, that Muppets and worked with the Muppets over the years. Frank was saying it's hard to remember a recording session with Joe because it's very especially in those.
Well, they talk about it.
Yeah.
One of the band said, one of them said, he wrote some great songs people always remember, and Danny said, and he always wrote them on the way to work.
Yeah, yeah.
That's,
Are you rolling?
Rolling.
No.
Okay, so
Okay.
Joe and his work habits.
Work habits. Well, I recall that Joe so often wrote the material just the night before, at the last possible moment, and I guess that's one thing about him, because he was so facile. He knew how to write music really well, and he could do it very easily. And so he could sit down and put a song together very quickly, and then make it look like he spent the last month working very hard on it, which is what he'll tell you. But one of the nice things, Joe is very flexible, and so if he came in with something and you didn't like a part of it, you could say, hey, why don't you work on that area a little bit more, or take the whole song and give it another little twist, push it around a little bit and make it more show business or less noisy, and he was very flexible in that sense. Such a very good musician, and I think a lot of that comes out of just really knowing what you're doing. He was capable of writing in many different styles. For the Great Muppet Caper, he gave us... We wanted to create an old-fashioned movie musical. And so we wanted a number that looked like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers dancing in the nightclub. And then we wanted a number that was like Esther Williams and Underwater. And he was just terrific. He came through with all of those things. He also could do a raunchy little country number for Dr. Teeth's band. So again, stylistically, he could cover such a wide range.
He did that even within his Sesame Street films. He would
Sure.
do 20s and music.
Yeah.
Just whatever seemed to fit. He had a wonderful rapport. For instance, we've talked about with writing for animals, all those little animal films that he scored,
Yeah.
and put little songs to.
Have you talked about the Giblin film?
No, do. We want to use that.
I think maybe my favorite piece of music that he ever wrote was written for a little piece of film about gibbons, this monkey swinging. And the way I heard the story, if it's true, is that Joe put this piece of tape on the television set and was watching it, and he threw this piece of music together right there, and what he put down immediately worked. And it's just a raw, simple piano track. And I heard the story that it was recorded on his little cassette player, the track that they actually used on the show. And I think it had to do with there was a dance group rehearsing in a nearby studio, and he picked up sort of the mood of that dance music and just stuck it onto this monkey swinging, and all of a sudden you have wonderful show business there. Did that do it enough?
It did, yes.
Yeah.
That's perfect. And that's exactly what did happen.
Yeah.
It was one of those dance studios near the old Bible building.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where he heard it.
But the track that they're using on the air, I think, was recorded on his cassette player.
Very tinny.
Yeah, it's just tinny little, but it's just wonderful.
Low five, so mid five.
Yeah, it's just a great piece of music. Being Green, I remember we recorded that for the first Sesame Street record album, and I remember coming in at 2 o'clock in the morning, because it was one of those tight deadlines like you always have, and recording that song in this darkened studio, in the wee hours of the morning, with Joe standing right in front of me like he would often do, and I'm singing into the microphone, and Joe's sort of mouthing the lyrics and acting the lyrics, so the emotions of each area as you come to it, and I did many songs with Joe that way, and he was just wonderful because he would really sort of lead me through it and coach me through the emotions of the song. He wrote songs with a very, I'm sure people have talked about the childlike simplicity. There is a cleanliness to his sense of composition, and that works very well for children, but it works for adults too, because there is that that sense of simplicity in all of us, whether we're children or adults.
That's nice. Now, what areas do we want to,
Are there any sort of good Joe stories, new things that amused you about him, or moments that amused you about him? That you can think of as far as the summer. Frank was talking about being at the spa.
in Toronto.
In Toronto.
Some shoot that they adjourned at 2 a.m. to resume at 5 a.m. on one of these 24-hour shoots, and they all went to the athletic club or something in Toronto where they had a whirlpool, and they were all sitting in the pool kind of zonking out, and suddenly Frank looked up, and here was Joe naked coming across the towel.
An imposing sight, no doubt.
I mean, Joe stepping gently into the pool was equivalent to somebody else doing a cannonball up.
The water level was 2 feet.
Joe Raposo. Has anybody talked about Joe being a name dropper?
No, but that's...
I don't know if you want to speak. Are you speaking nicely of the dead here?
Tom Whedon's famous quote a number of times. You're with Joe for 2 or 3 minutes, you're up to your hips in names.
Joe is such a name dropper. He was the only person that could work into a conversation all the important people he's seen in the last 6 months, and Barbra Streisand's telephone number. Let's see.
He was absolutely the most starstruck individual I ever saw.
Well, he enjoyed show business. He enjoyed the people of show business. He was show business himself, and so he enjoyed people connected with the movies, with the record industry, certainly with television, with theater, and he felt a part of all of those people and enjoyed their company and talked their language very well.
And wanted you to know that he knew their names.
Yes, I knew them all by. Yes, had them all over for dinner.
We also talked a little bit about his ability to get inside of things, empathize with animals, kids, somebody come and play. I mean, if that struck you, and the characters, I guess.
Yeah.
Is that something that...
It was
I think... all of us are still children. All of us are still children at heart, and even the most sophisticated people have a child still in them. And I think Joe is very much in touch with the child within himself, and could express it, and could see the world through that child, and could write songs about it. So he still had that perspective, which a lot of people have. But I think Joe is in touch with it in a very warm, compassionate way too. He's a very warm man, very caring and very giving of himself.
That way of extending himself really went even beyond children to the animal films. I mean, he could take a film about two rhinoceroses and write a song from the rhinoceros's point of view.
What's the song with the bird? I've got a bird on my back.
A bird on me.
Oh, there's a bird on me. You can't see.
There's a
bird on me.
There's a bird on me. I love that song. It's just one of my favorites.
Quack, quack, come on, bird, get off my back. One of the birds. That'll be in there somewhere.
Yeah.
The rhinoceros song, is just a wonderful kind of 20s crooner through a very tinny microphone sound of I'm in love with you, pretty baby. And it was one rhinoceros singing to another.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just a wonderful, simplistic imagination he had.
Yeah.
And it extended, I think, to the Muppets a good deal. I mean, he was able to think for a little ball of fuzz.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think. What else did he do for us? He did a Fantastic Miss Piggy show. He did an album of Miss Piggy aerobics, which didn't sell one record, or maybe it sold a couple. We won't talk about that one.
We've all had those.
Yes.
It went lead, as they say.
Yes.
You remember anything from the early days, Jim? I mean, we were talking to Jerry was trying to remember where he met Joe, and it was the pilot of Cinderella, where most people, I think, came across.
Yeah.
We all got together for the first time on that.
Well, I remember, of course, that we wandered across town doing presentations for an early television special of ours. That was the Great Santa Claus Switch. Joe wrote the music for that. And we played most of the conference rooms in the city of New York with our presentation. And Joe would play the piano, and I would sing the songs and work one of the puppets. And we pitched this thing all over the place. And we did eventually make the show, and it was quite nice, and had some very nice music in it. Joe did a beautiful Christmas song for that, which I think we've never used since then. I should get that back up.
Joe did unrelated. Christmas was very special to Joe. That was his holiday.
Mm-hmm.
He loved writing Christmas music. Mm-hmm. And we used to go caroling when we all lived on the Upper West Side. Sam Powell and Joe and Tom Wheaton and I and half a dozen others would go out and sing Christmas carols to families that only spoke Spanish. The old days.
Yeah. Well, certainly you introduced me to Joe, because you brought Joe to the Muppets, and then for many years Joe was sort of our main composer and sort of did most of the music for all of the television guest shots and specials that we were working on at the time. So he was very much part of our family when we first got started.
Good choice. He was. And now, while we got him, what do we need? Anything? Sort of filled our larder today, have we?
I think we really have, yeah.
I'm just trying to. Frank had talked a little about recording, about sessions with Joe, which was sort of fun. You mentioned how he would stand nose to nose with you across the microphone and give you the emotions and the facial expression. Yes. And the habit of showing up late with half the song written.
Mm-hmm.
But what someone said that was quite wonderful was that Joe wasn't a stickler for the notes he wrote, as many songwriters are. He was really a stickler for the performance. And if the performance rang true, whether you spoke the words or sang the words or sang different notes or something, didn't matter to him as much as that it
feeling.
Worked.
Yeah,
feeling was very strong, important to Joe.
Yeah,
in his music.
When you were going around pitching shows and having trouble, did he get discouraged, or was he generally?
No.
No, he. I was talk about that. Yeah. Balance in it, because we're doing beginnings, beginnings is kind of.
Well, I think in the early days, he always had this wonderful enthusiasm. Always in a good mood. Always bubbly, bouncy. Ready to do it again. And if we struck out in one place, we'd head somewhere else. And he was always right on top of it. That energy and enthusiasm was with him, I think, all the time. Whenever he was working. And it's very infectious. It works. It leads people. It brings them up when it's 3 a.m. and you're pretty tired. Let's see.
Everyone who worked with him, the band especially, said that he was a cheerleader.
But he was such a good musician that the musicians always respected him too. And he was marvelous on the keyboards. He could get anything out of, whether it was a harpsichord or a piano or an organ. He could just do wonderful things, and a wonderful accompanist. So very sensitive and right there with the performer all the time. And the sense of performance was always so important to him. How you performed it, how you felt the song, whether you capture the emotion, and a good performance mattered more to him than the notes you hit. Whether you could, even if he wrote it one note and you sang a slightly different note instead, he would go along with that if he felt the song worked.
Yeah.
just to sort of
Interesting. Jonathan went on at length about his skill as an accompanist, just how sensitive he was to the singer.
Yeah, exactly.
Terrific.
I remember, this is probably, I always date Heather's birth, not Heather's, Brian's birth from, when was it? Great Santa Claus Switch, or was it Heather now? All of a sudden I'm confused. It was Heather's birth, yeah. We were mixing the Great Santa Claus Switch at 2 in the morning when Jane called and said, and I had to turn over the mix to Joe. He had to finish the mix while I went home for the birth of my 5th child. Well, that was 19 years ago.
If you think of him now, just sort of, I find someone I remember, I have a fix on him. There's one typical way I see that. What would that be? You remember him? Is there any?
I think of Joe. I remember his warmth. I think of Joe as a big warm teddy bear. You know, seeing him for the first time in several months, and always the big hug, and the big smile, and the friendliness, and the open heart. You know.
That'll fit into a montage of an awful lot of people.
Yes.
Joe's hugging was
the abrazo montage.
Yes.
It's nice. Everyone says that.
Yeah.
Okay.
What a wonderful thing to be remembered for by so many people.
Yeah.
I think we're wrapped. That looks good.
Yeah.
Thank you.